Welcome into the Blogger Bowl. It's your Week 9 recap. It's your Week 10 early lines look ahead. Dan, I love the ECU sweatshirt. You've been rocking that one for a week or so now. It's fantastic. I got my Notre Dame shirt on. We won. It was a nice win at Syracuse. We'll take it. Big. Well, I'll probably wear a little more if we win on Saturday night. But after a few weeks of slates, I won't say bad slates, but definitely a little bit more apple picking type slates. We have ourselves a doozy this weekend, highlighted by number 1, number 2, and I don't think we've had that for quite some time that I can at least remember off the top of my head.
In the regular season, off the top of my head, I can't think of when the last one was. Could probably look that up and find it out. I want to shout out East Carolina. I seem to be on the opposite end of the rest of the world on East Carolina at BYU on Friday night, but the Pirates got to win. BYU is really bad. I think
I don't know what happened there. That was
defense.
Are they?
Go ahead.
Are they super hurt or what's going on there? Because going into the year, us included, that was a team bringing a lot back, and obviously they're all a little bit older with a head coach who's gaining some momentum with a team that's they probably can't be last year's Cincinnati, but maybe.
Well, the schedule was always going to be too hard for them to do that, but they just haven't played well. Gunnar Romney's been hurt most of the year, but Nakua has been back for a while. They did have a couple of guys out, and there's rumors that the quarterback's hurt, but they're not saying anything about it. But their defense looked like it might have turned a corner against Baylor, and then they just have been really bad ever since. But I gave them out, and they won. I wanted to ask you about one of the games you bet on, and you don't even remember what you bet on, so this is even funnier. And
I remember once to bring it up, but yeah.
I'm not trying to be an asshole. I thought this was a good bet when you gave it out. I contemplated adding it to my card. I did not. But have you ever had a second half go as disastrously?
No, I know what you're talking about.
For a team you've bet on than Wake Forest against Louisville.
Oh. I was actually thinking of a different one. We'll get to that after.
Here is Wake Forest second half drive chart against Louisville. Pick 6, fumble, interception, fumble, punt, interception, fumble, interception that got fumbled and they recovered, and then 11-yard touchdown.
Listen, I said it going into that game. I think I talked about it on here and I think I gave it out on Brown Bag Bets too, if I'm not mistaken. I thought the line was weird. I think we talked about it though, how Louisville is just they're teetering on the I'm never touching their games because I don't know which team we're going to get. But now they're officially in that camp because a couple weeks ago I bet on them to cover 4.5 against Boston College, and they lose that one outright, and it's not all that close. And then they're 3.5 point favorite underdogs at home against Wake Forest, is number 10 in the country, and obviously probably not the 10th best team in the country, but good. And they win 48-14. So Louisville is officially in the I'm not touching any one of their games ever camp. I'm just done with them for the rest of the year. Not in a bad way, but you never know what you're getting from them each week.
You never know what you're going to get from Louisville. I may have them on the card this week. I might not have them on the card. I might not have them on the card this week. Their game might be on my card this week. I have them on the list of games because I don't want you to. If you don't know who they're playing this week, really bizarre schedule spot. So
don't know. So I'm looking forward to hearing from it.
We'll recap or we'll look ahead at the lines for everything coming up. Remiss if we don't say happy MACtion Day to everyone who celebrates.
We did it.
Where our long national nightmare is over. We will now have Tuesday and Wednesday night MACtion for the next basically month. I think the week after Thanksgiving is. I think the week of Thanksgiving is when it ends, or maybe it's.
Yeah, I believe so.
Nevertheless, couple games tonight. We'll talk about those lines also tonight, but we start with our recap, and we'll start with what was the best game of the day and a slate that was pretty bad across the board. We weren't super psyched about the slate, and then it didn't deliver. So
it lived up to the hype of not being awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Just one of those weeks in college football. It happens. But Ohio State 44, Penn State 31. In a game with 75 points, the best player on the field was on defense. JT Tuimoloau had an out-of-body experience with 3 tackles for a loss, 2 sacks, 2 picks, a pick 6, and a forced fumble. I wrote down he was the prince who was promised for the Game of Thrones fans out there. He was the number 4 recruit in the 2021 class, and he became a star. The Ohio State teams that have always been their best over at least the last decade have had a Bosa brother or a Chase Young, and now it looks like they might actually have the defensive game changer that they've been lacking since Chase Young left. So really great performance from him. On the flip side, warning signs everywhere for Ohio State.
Yeah.
The secondary looked suspect, and they allowed Penn State to run the ball decently well. The offensive line didn't look overwhelming in this game. CJ Stroud is incredible when he's able to stay on schedule and able to stay comfortable in the pocket. But if you make him uncomfortable, he looks a little shaky. The injuries are becoming an issue. Fortunately for them, they don't play a tough game again until they play Michigan. I think it's Indiana, Maryland, and maybe Rutgers in there. I think they're their next three. So they have time to get Jackson Smith and Jigba healthy, but he hasn't played hardly at all this year. Emeka Egbuka has been up and down. Didn't play great the other day.
Marvin Harrison Jr. is a stud.
Marvin Harrison Jr. is awesome. But like we talk about Ohio State in the context of winning a national championship, and they're going to need someone else other than
they're going to need Jackson Smith and Jigba healthy.
Right.
Without him healthy, they're not winning a national championship. And honestly, I think he's probably pretty healthy. I think after his Rose Bowl last year, where he pretty much put himself on the map as the number one receiver in next year's draft class. Now, Jordan, you can argue with Jordan Addison. I still think it's a healthy Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think after the tweak against Notre Dame and seeing their schedule, there's probably – now, you would have thought maybe you see him play this weekend, but I think there's probably a little bit of I'm taking it easy. I'll see a Michigan week in the playoff. That's just kind of my thinking.
I think they're going to try to get him some snaps every now and then. I don't think you really want him to go from having not played at all to needing to make catches against Michigan. But yeah, I mean, a handful of snaps here and there, maybe a few snaps early on in their next game. I don't even know if they have a bye week or if they're playing this week. Or
I think after the Notre Dame and the injury in the Notre Dame game, it was a agreement that he's going to be on a pitch count. And what that pitch count is, I'm not really sure. But once he got fully healthy, it was a pitch count like, hey, we're going to get you on a pitch count. And then towards the end of the year, once we want you fully ramped up for Michigan Big Ten championship and hopefully a playoff for them.
I want to talk about the coaching here for a second, but before we do that, I want to just get your thoughts on what you just before we get to the Ryan Day issue, which is something we were both kind of talking about on Twitter on Saturday. Just your thoughts on the game in general before we talk about that whole elephant in the room.
So I had this one on TV2 because my Irish were playing and I had to watch them. They're always on TV1. And TV2 is now, unfortunately for me, a laptop screen. I don't have my two TV setup going anymore. There's just something, I don't know if it's that rivalry, but there's just something about this goes to the stemming to the head coach talk. Like there just seems to be a lack of creativity with Ohio State, which is, it's very reliant on our players are a lot more talented than you, and we're just going to kind of do what we do. And that works for 90% of the teams you're going to play. But when you play a team like Penn State or like Michigan coming up, who are they as talented as you? No. Are they very talented, like kind of right there knocking on the door? Yeah. It seems like once they get tossed out of their comfort zone, there's a little bit of a, what do? We don't really know what to do. Like Ryan Day kind of running around with like a chicken with his head cut off. And I don't love the whole born on third base narrative there with him, but like he hasn't really, like he kind of is a little bit, and he's still recruiting well. And I got to be honest with you, like that Ohio State team for me has not reached its potential of what it could be with Ryan Day. If you look at that roster, that team should be the best team in college football this year, probably like, I don't want to say by far, but like comfortably. Like that team should be the best in college football this year. And we're still just kind of waiting. Like, when is it going to happen for them? When are things going to click for them? I'm not really sure, but they got some things to figure out. And luckily for them, they get Michigan at home because I don't think this team deals with adversity very well. So if you get your biggest rival as your best opponent at home, obviously a good thing for that. But like we saw it a little bit against Penn State, and they were a better team than Penn State. And luckily for them, Penn State's coached by James Franklin and had Sean Clifford as their quarterback, so they kind of made their mistakes too. But I don't know. Away from home, it just doesn't seem like the same team that it was. You know, I hate Urban Meyer as a person, but like under the stability of Urban Meyer that he kind of provided there.
Couple things. One,
which is weird. I just said stability in Urban Meyer. That's you know what I mean. But you know what I mean. He was as a college football coach. Obviously, he knew what he was doing. That's kind of
right. I mean, look, you can judge him based on what happened with the Jaguars, but he was never committed to that job at all. And like, of course not. Whatever. I don't want to talk about Urban Meyer.
Yes,
Urban Meyer's
that's not what I was getting at.
One of the great college football coaches of all time. Yeah, I mean, as far as the born on third base narrative, like. I don't think Ryan Day is. I don't want to necessarily say I think he's necessarily a bad coach. I don't want to go that far.
No, I would not.
I want to say but I'm not sure he's anything more than a net neutral at best.
I don't think he's going to ever win them a game.
Right, and that's kind of problematic. And as far as the Michigan thing is concerned, I was just looking to see if there are any look-ahead lines for it open. There had been, I think, maybe
It
not.
was like 10.5 last I
If it's
saw.
10.5, if it's above 7, I think Michigan's a bet, like in
I
that
do
game.
too.
I
I
do
would take, if you're giving me
100%.
double-digit points of
Yeah.
Michigan,
If you
I'm
give me
taking
more
it.
than 7, if you give me 7
Yeah.
or more, I think Michigan's a bet. I think anything under
Probably.
7, I'm probably not touching. I think if you give me, because I think Michigan is very game. That's neither here nor there. Less so like the concerns about whether or not like he can call plays and really help them figure things out if things don't go well is valid. I just his game management was curious. There were a couple things in that game that made absolutely no sense. You have the play right before, you have the last play before halftime. They have 6 seconds left, no time, or they have one timeout, 6 seconds left. They're on like the 5 or 6.
This made no sense to me.
You have to throw the fade to Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yes.
There, if it's incomplete, fine.
Fine.
You
Yeah,
have
it's
to
it's
throw,
literally take the
snap the
snap,
ball,
quick fade
throw the
to
ball,
the end zone, and it's
and
either
then you
back
might have a
corner
second
catch
left.
or out of bounds.
You're very unlikely to call a play in that scenario where you're going to have a chance to use that timeout or where that timeout's going to matter. So why don't you call the timeout, talk it over, say, here's what we're running, here's what you do, you snap it, you throw it, and then we'll kick a field goal. They don't, he gets hit, fumble, they recover, doesn't matter. They don't get any points there. And then they score a touchdown to go up 22-21. They line up to go for the 2-point conversion to make it a 3-point game, like obviously. Mm-hmm. They get a false start, and then he kicks the extra point. Like, the extra point does you no good there. There's not a single scenario we're going up by 2 points. Okay, well, if you get a safety, okay, now you're tied. Like, in the very realistic scenario, you're going to give up a safety. Yeah, that doesn't make any damn sense. And then he did it again. They were up by 13. They're up by 2. They scored a touchdown to go up by 12. You should go for 2 no matter what there. But instead, they get a false start and they kick an extra point to go up 13. It's just like, man, the little things that they do, like those things aren't going to matter unless you play Michigan, unless you play Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Clemson, whatever. But that's what your 2 of your last 3 games are going to be. They're not going to need that against Illinois, probably. Mm-hmm. They're going to need it against Michigan. Michigan might come down to a game of margins. A playoff game, winning a national championship, might come down to a game of margins. That said, my last thing on this, they still had 7.5 yards per play in this game. It's like they just find an extra gear, and I think that's what makes them more terrifying than anybody else in the country, is that we know their defense has guys who can make plays. They were a little shaky. That's fine, but their floor on defense is still reasonably high enough that their ceiling on offense makes them, I think, the most dangerous team. I don't know if they're going to be able to put it all together, and I think some of that largely is going to be on a head coach who I think we're both kind of iffy on.
Yeah, it's going to come down to, like you said, whether or not they can put it all together. If they can, they are the best team in the country. If they can, I trust their defense to figure things out because they are talented. And Jim Knowles is one of, if not the best defensive coordinators in the country, especially at making adjustments. I trust that they will be fine there. But yeah, the offense has to be able to put it all together because it's way too talented not to be.
Oh, man. The Nets are going to hire Ime Udoka. Nevertheless, moving on.
This league, Dan.
This league. Hashtag this
league.
Hashtag
this league.
Moving on, we're going to talk about the 2 big SEC games of the week, at least in terms of setting us up for the SEC game of the century of the week coming up this week. Let's start with the one that you were a lot more confident in one team than I was, but your assessment ended up being fairly correct, although I don't think anyone would have predicted Tennessee 44, Kentucky 6.
No.
What was your takeaway? What did you think? What did you see on Saturday in that clusterfuck of a game?
Tennessee's good, man. That offense is just good. Like, also, someone just needs to figure out, like, maybe have a safety shadow Jalen Hyatt. And if he's running deep, just kind of play center field. I don't know. But that seems to be something even Nick Saban couldn't figure out. Tennessee's offense is just good. And you got a complete performance from a defense. Like, I know Kentucky's strengths kind of feed into what Tennessee's defense does well. But we talk about them being able to stop the run. We talk about them being able to get after the passer a little bit, and Will Levis is not Bryce Young, and Bryce Young was able to evade a lot of those sacks, but Will Levis not so much. Man, that was a spot for Tennessee where it could have been so easy to look ahead to Georgia, limp your way through, and maybe come away with a 23-20 win where you're like, oh my God, like that was closer than it needed to be, but whatever, run to Georgia. That was a supreme confidence game. Like that, there is no doubt. And now whether they beat Georgia, I'm not sure. Whether they're better than Georgia, they're probably not position by position on paper a better football team than Georgia. But with what that team came out and did at home against Kentucky, there's no doubt in that locker room right now that they are the better team, which is a very important thing to have going into a matchup with Georgia, where they very well likely are the better team. That matchup made me even more excited for the Georgia matchup.
Oh, I don't agree that they're better. They're the better team than Georgia. Not even remotely.
No, that's what I said. That they're. I said in their heads.
Oh, in there.
There's no doubt that they think they're the better team.
Gotcha.
That's important when you're going into a matchup where you're playing a team that's better than you. That confidence that you're better than Georgia, even though you might not be, thinking you are, is of going into a hostile environment on the road is very important.
Yeah. Oddly enough, I guess maybe it was based on my expectations for this. I think this game says a lot more about Kentucky than it does Tennessee. And like, as far as
my take I've had all year that Will Levis kind of sucks.
Well, I'll get to that, but like in Tennessee's case, they were phenomenal. They checked every box you want to see from them in a game like this. The offense was incredible. The defense was stout. A+++ performance from everyone involved. But like I said, my takeaway more about Kentucky. Mark Stoops coaches like a coach who's fine winning 9 games in a tough conference, and if that's what he wants, that's fine. But like, he's getting paid a shitload of money, and eventually you think he's going to have to aspire to more than winning 9 or 10 games in the SEC. They're never going to be on Georgia's level. Like, they're just not. Like, they're not going to be able to recruit the way Georgia does. But the fact that they've been – and I know Tennessee is a historical powerhouse and their resources are better and blah, 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 blah. But the fact that they've been lapped this badly in 2 years by Tennessee, I think also says a lot about where this program is. I've never understood the Will Levis hype. If you have a potential top 10 pick at quarterback and still want to be overly reliant on the run, that's a problem. If they thought they could win and the way that they always play, that was foolish. You know, I've said my favorite quote before on this show, or one of my favorite quotes: everyone's got to play until they get punched in the mouth. Well, when Jalen Hyatt runs by a safety and a defensive back and is wide open for a touchdown and it's 7-0 before you've had a chance to like breathe, you maybe need to abandon the run a little bit. It felt like they were in 3rd and long a lot. 11 of their 13 third downs were 7+ yards or longer. Like, that's not on Will Levis. Like, they were just not going to give up on the run. I thought the few times they used the short passing game in lieu of the run, they looked good. Chris Rodriguez went out with a bit of a knock, came back, he was fine, missed a few plays, and Will Levis was using the short passing game instead of the runs, and they moved the ball, then Rodriguez comes back in and the drive stalls. But that said, man, like, first off, wildly disappointing from Kentucky. And we've talked about it. You've been on the train for a long time. And I'm just going to reemphasize the point. Like, Josh Allen is going to get a lot of people fired in the NFL. And Will Levis is going to be the next guy that Josh Allen gets people fired over. He's supposed to be this NFL prospect, but here he is in the SEC games this year. The most passing yards he has is 230 against Mississippi State. He has 4 touchdowns versus 4 interceptions against SEC teams. He's 23rd in the country in passing efficiency because he completes 68% of his passes, but he completes that many passes because amongst quarterbacks with a minimum of 218 dropbacks, he ranks 69th out of 90 in average depth of target. So they are not trying to stretch the field at all with Will Levis. And if this guy's an NFL quarterback, if he's a guy who's got an NFL arm, and like, I don't doubt that he's got an NFL arm and he's got the sides, it's just playing quarterback. I have no freaking idea. I just don't see it. But if that's your guy, I said it before the game, if that's your guy, and you saw what Anthony Richardson, who is not a good passer, did throwing the, like, Florida, maybe that's where Florida and Kentucky differ right now. Like, Billy Napier comes in year 1, and I know Tennessee, their confidence has just been building to this point, and Tennessee is a more well-rounded team now than they were when they played Florida. But like, Billy Napier said, fuck it, we're going to just go out there. We know we're going to have to throw the ball and complete some big plays. And just like, Kentucky was just like, no, we're just going to run the ball, and if we lose, we lose. Like, whatever, man. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, like it's stubborn, dead set on, well, we're just going to do what we do, and if that's not good enough, then we're not good enough. And that's just, especially when you have a quarterback that you're supposed to be, that's supposed to be, like you said, this top 5 pick, this great quarterback prospect, and you don't trust him well enough to let him try and throw you out of a jam. I think it says all you need to know about the coaching staff. And like the point you made too is, I know Tennessee, like you said, has a few more resources and some more money, but the fact that Kentucky was so far ahead of where Tennessee was, winning 10 games last year, and that they've already been lapped basically twice now by Tennessee with how good Tennessee is, how much they beat Kentucky by, kind of where Tennessee is a program now, or at least this year. I think it says a lot about where Kentucky is and where that staff is.
For sure. And ironically enough, while we're talking about this, I tweeted the Will Levis depth of target thing Chris Felica just responded to me on Twitter because I tweeted that out. He said, and he plays behind an offensive line which has allowed the highest sack rate in the Power 5. So, like, that's also another problem is Kentucky's offensive line hasn't been good, at least pass protecting. But, like, I mean,
if you can run the ball, and I'm going to sound, I'm a Bears fan, and the Chicago Bears can't really pass protect. But what they've done recently is they run the ball really well, but they found ways to, create the extensions of the run game. Not everything's now a traditional run. Getting the ball outside to receivers, getting the ball outside to running backs, getting your quarterback. Like, there's ways to run the ball without just turning around and handing off to Chris Rodriguez and hoping it works. Like, you can get creative and create extensions of the run game without just doing your traditional, 32 inside or 36 power.
Right. Exactly. Two-part quote here, or question / thought from our friend. God, I can't figure out why it's not working. Leg Show Magazine, who is one of our most loyal viewers of Brown Bag Bets. He says, I told you told you under in the Oklahoma-Iowa State game, which he was right about.
I told you Oklahoma money line.
Who I hate, who won that game money line. He said, did get the wrong picking the over in the BYU game, which he says, correction, I was wrong as far as the over in Utah, Washington State, not BYU. In fairness, Leg Show, you didn't know, nor did anybody, including the broadcast crew, that Cam Rising wasn't going to play.
Oh, hey, there's Cam Rising on the sideline.
Yeah, wasn't going to play. He says, what do you guys like in today's MACtion? I will say we will talk about the MACtion games once we get through our recap. So if you can stick around for that, we will talk about it later. Or, and this is maybe a bad thing to say when we're doing a live show, you can go check out the replay of Brown Bag Bets today where Matt filled in for Andy on Tuesday like he typically does. And he gave out picks for both games. So you can go check those out, or you can stick around and we will talk about those games when we get to our recaps or to our odds for the week. The other SEC game of the week that was of note leading us into this week's games, Georgia 42, Florida 20. And I'm just going to ask you a question.
Sure.
If you gave Kirby Smart some sodium pentothal, which is otherwise known as truth serum, do you think he'd rather the game gone the way it did would Kirby Smart rather the game have gone the way it did than it just being 4 quarters of total domination the way Tennessee did to Kentucky?
Oh, yeah. I don't think you'd even need to give him that. College football coaches, all football coaches, but I feel like college and high school coaches especially love that because you need, coaches feed off, like Saban does it all the time. They feed off that fake kind of narrative of you're not as good as you think you are, like fighting through adversity, all that. Well, Georgia, that game was never really in danger of Georgia not winning it. The fact that he kind of has that to fall back on, and, Georgia's team probably might need a little bit of a kick in the ass because at times they have walked through some bad opponents. And with a game like Tennessee coming up, a reminder of, hey, if you're not firing on all cylinders at all time, yeah, you got by Florida. That's nice. You're not going to get by Tennessee. That's a message that Kirby Smart can use to kind of motivate that team. Whereas if they didn't play their best and if they still cruise to a 42-10 win and it's never close, that team is still drinking a little bit more Kool-Aid probably than they should be, their own, drinking your own Kool-Aid. So I think that you wouldn't even need to give him that truth serum for him to admit that.
Yeah, I mean, they were never in danger of losing. Like, it was the perfect outcome for Kirby Smart in Georgia. Yes. They were never in danger of losing this game, but they made enough mistakes for Kirby and his staff to have a lot of reason to yell at them.
Some Georgia fans would have liked maybe one more point.
Well, there certainly is that. But there was certainly enough reason to yell at this team based on what they did in this game. It got to, I think, 8 points at one point, and then Georgia just drove down the field and scored. And that was that. Despite being shaky on offense with some bad drops, they were still relatively efficient on offense for the most part. It did get wonky because of 2 bad interceptions from Stetson Bennett. The conversation with him is going to ignite once again ahead of that. Hard to imagine a scenario in which he has to he can win a shootout with Hendon Hooker on Saturday, but that's probably not what's going to happen. Largely, though, Florida didn't have the horses to run in this game. Give them credit. They did not roll over. They fought their way back into the game as best they could, but it was a lopsided game on the field, on the stat sheet, aside from about a 6-minute period in the third quarter where Florida made it a game. So kudos to them for not giving up, but Georgia has us on track for a massive, massive showdown on Saturday. And then the last of at least the big games we talked about, buddy, I said I had no idea. Kansas State, Oklahoma State, every number I saw said a close game. These teams just about even. Kansas State 48, Oklahoma State 0. Injuries and an empty gas tank caught up to Oklahoma State. The injury situation has become a problem for them. Their offensive line, they lost an offensive lineman late against Texas that I completely just forgot about. They just could not do anything. They got steamrolled by a team that was a little pissed off after losing the game to TCU and was returning home. So Illinois' defensive coordinator, Ryan Walters, and I think should easily win the Broyles Award for the top assistant if Illinois finishes the season reasonably well. But Colin Klein deserves some love, man. He got the best out of Adrian Martinez before Adrian Martinez got hurt, and they have not missed a beat with Will Howard at quarterback. 296 yards, 4 touchdowns off the bench. Doesn't seem to matter who's playing quarterback, at least if they're starting or backup quarterback, because Colin Klein, of course, the legend who was a Heisman.
I was going to say, I didn't realize Kansas State legend Colin Klein was their
he's their offensive coordinator now. He was their quarterbacks coach last year and got promoted this year. I don't remember where their OC went. But yeah, Colin Klein has done a great job, and they get another big game, which is on our list of games we'll talk about coming up and is already on my card for this week. Spoiler alert, I'm not super optimistic about the team they're playing. Okay. So what did you watch any of this? Like
this one I didn't get a ton of. I had like my 15th wedding of the year on Saturday, so I was in the process of making the hour drive out to DeKalb to go to a wedding, so I didn't get to see a ton of this one. But all honesty, when I was also watching earlier, I kind of started checking the scores like, oh, well, this game's over. I don't really need to tune into it at this point. But like you said, Oklahoma State, the injuries caught up, and I was wrong in my projection of Kansas State might be a little bit more affected by the injuries. They were not, and they're looking like a really good team, and they're going to be kicking themselves for that loss to Tulane, who is a fine football team, but absolutely a game Kansas State should not have lost because, they're in prime position to go make a run and try and win a Big 12. And if you win the Big 12 and your only loss is a tight one at TCU, you're talking about a playoff bid.
Yeah,
potential one.
Right. If they run the table and get the revenge in a game against TCU, a game they had a really good chance to win and might have won if their quarterbacks hadn't gotten hurt. That's an interesting point, but you know me, I am not a hashtag scenario season guy anymore. I can't do it. Oh, by the way, the playoffs come out today. Rankings 1 through 4, it does not matter.
Dan, it matters for everything.
Oh, Jesus. The night window on set, like the window all day, like the Ohio State game was really fun. Like the Ohio State game was really interesting, a really good game. The rest of the day was kind of brutal. Georgia, Florida, like we said, got interesting for a little bit. The night window.
Hey, Notre Dame, Syracuse was fun.
Yeah, I wasn't even. What was I watching? I was watching the TCU West Virginia was interesting for a while.
That was
in that game as well. TCU found another way to win, and they didn't end up. They actually played a game against a quarterback who either wasn't hurt and didn't get hurt. So kudos to them for that. The night window was brutal. I ended up with A&M Ole Miss on the TV because that was the best game going on at the time. Another interesting outcome there, and I can't even remember what was on the second screen. So. I
kind of enjoy like spite watching A&M now, even though we don't talk about them. Like it's just fun for me to see Jimbo kind of suffer and lose.
I'll go wherever the good games are, and like I'd actually come out of that game thinking, aside from the fact that he might have just like completely violated his quarterback's health by pulling him out of concussion protocol, allegedly. You can see some things developing if Jimbo Fisher would just stop being so stubborn and hire an offensive coordinator, which probably won't happen because he's no impetus to. Wigman looked good, I thought at times. Wigman looked good. Muhammad, like they have two really good young receivers in Muhammad and Evan Stewart. Like there's pieces there. Like
there definitely are.
If they can figure out the dysfunction, which is Texas A&M's history in a nutshell, they're going to be really good. But I didn't really want to talk about that game. Few odds and ends before we move on to look at the lines. Just wanted to do an FCS thing super quick. Just shout out to St. Thomas. St. Thomas. So
shout out Phil.
Well, shout out to Holy Cross.
What? Sorry, we had other Fenwick players that went to St. Thomas.
Gotcha.
That's why I said shout out Phil.
Yep. So if you don't know St. Thomas, they were a Division III school that got kicked out of their conference for being too good. So they decided to make the jump straight to Division I to FCS. So they skipped Division II. And their second year, they are ranked in the top 25 for the first time in the coaches poll. So shout out to the Tommies. They're ineligible for the playoffs because they're in the second year of their transition, but still thought that was cool. Man, unironically, how about those UConn Huskies getting a win over an ACC team? They have 4 wins. They have a game they should win easily on Friday night against UMass, and they play Liberty after that, which is a tough task, but the game after that at Army is winnable. UConn might be a bowl bowling. Like we laughed at the Jim Mora hire. I still don't necessarily think long-term it's going to be great, but that team might go bowling. Meanwhile, Boston College, man, it looked like in year one under Jeff Hafley, like they went 6-5 in the COVID year. And I was like, this is something to build on, and they have just flatlined ever since. I know they've had a ton of injuries the last 2 years. Phil Jurkovec, I don't think has ever been the same since injury, and they've had even more injuries to deal with this year. But basically, everyone at Boston College wants him gone, so keep that in mind. That job might come open sooner rather than
It's
later.
hard to call a team that was never really like Boston College was never even thought of as being a playoff contender this year, or barely a team that was thought of as being an ACC championship contender. But like they were a team that had some 8-4, 9-3 type expectations if all things went well this year. I'm not sure there's been a more disappointing team in the all things considered than Boston College with where they're supposed to be with Jurkovec, with Zay Flowers, who's a fantastic wide receiver. Like I know that that football teams and offenses are more than just a quarterback and receiver, but if you have a combo like that, that should win you a couple games just in and of itself. And they look terrible.
Yeah, it's a really bad situation, and just thinking that they wanted Halfley fired made me think. Like, shout out to Auburn, Brian Harsin gone. They hired a new AD
Surprised it took him
from
this
Mississippi
long.
State, who wants Lane Kiffin, who I don't think I would leave Ole Miss right now for that cauldron of whatever the fuck that is.
I was having my debate with this debate with my brother yesterday.
Okay.
And I think to me, it's a fascinating debate because the higher ceiling is certainly at Auburn. And if you think that you could, a coach like Lane Kiffin comes in and has a longer leash than Brian Harsin. He's not getting fired after a year and a half. You assumingly have a contract that, makes it pretty ironclad, that gives you time to, a couple of years to turn things around. And if you have an ego and think you can do that quickly, like that ceiling, we've seen where it goes. It's going to the national championship. It's winning the national championship. Whereas Ole Miss, I think you're kind of stuck in I don't want to say stuck, but like you're going to be a 10-2, 9-3, 8-4 kind of window. Mostly the floor is a lot higher, but man, like that Auburn job would be tempting because that ceiling's there. And I don't know if Lane Kiffin has any desire to try and go toe to toe with his mentor, or if he's just dead set on being at Ole Miss and then maybe taking over for his mentor in 10 years when he retires.
Well, I don't think
not mentor, but you know what I mean.
I don't really think he likes Saban. I think he's smart and he plays the PR game very well. Just to try not to.
Mentor was the wrong word.
I should have said. He does annoys Nick Saban. Historically,
I feel like him going to Auburn, he knows would annoy Nick Saban too.
Yeah, well, there's that. Historically, Auburn's a better, like at least since integration. Auburn's been a better job than Ole Miss. Obviously, they had the Cam Newton year where they went to they won the national title game. They had the year where Gus Malzahn took them to the national championship with a DB playing quarterback. Like that's a job that
was one of my favorite teams to. I know they weren't fantastic. I loved watching that team. Trey Mason was
the luck box of all luck boxes.
They did,
but everyone forgets because everyone remembers the kick six, which I was there for and was the damnedest thing I've ever seen in a football game in person or on television. I was there. That was preceded by the prayer at Jordan Harrigan's Georgia. Like that team luck boxed their way to a national championship game appearance and then lost on a last-second touchdown by Florida State. Yeah, man. The three best jobs in the SEC are in some order: Georgia, Alabama, LSU. I think the next order of jobs in some form or fashion are Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, and then you get to the rest. But I think right now it's a lateral move, maybe a minor step back for Lane Kiffin, because he's recruited decently well. He's got players like the Judkins, the running back, the freshman is really good.
Judkins, he's very good.
They've got some really good players there, and like Auburn's going to take a couple of years to kind of figure out how to get that ship righted. So I don't know for Lane Kiffin. I think long term, I think I agree that the ceiling for Auburn is higher. I think specifically right now for Lane Kiffin, I don't think that I would make that jump because I just think that he's got things moving in a nice direction at Ole Miss. And you get 1 year where if he gets the right quarterback in and they get Alabama at home, like I just don't know that Jackson Dart's the guy that's going to beat Alabama this year. But
if you're Auburn, I would be calling Lane Kiffin and be going after him. But you just saw. I think you have to take the route LSU did, and you have obviously you're like you said, LSU, Alabama. Probably two best jobs in the SEC. Georgia, the third.
I think Georgia.
Those are the three best jobs in the SEC. If you're Auburn, though, like you have the potential to get your program up into that echelon. I think you have to, and you're gonna. I mean, if you're a new AD, you only take that job if you kind of know you have as much money as you want to go around and spend. You need to go make a splash like LSU did and it's going to cost you money and it's going to cost you buyout terms and all that. you have to go out and get a big established name. I don't think you can roll the dice on a coordinator unless I can't think of one off the top of my head that is just a perfect fit. I think you have to try and lure a big name away from a program. I'm not sure who that is at this point. It obviously somebody that has to have some ties. People are floating around Deion Sanders. I'm not necessarily sure that's the hire right now, but
please God, let that happen.
That would be very entertaining. I'm not sure he's the guy.
As someone with absolutely no skin in that game whatsoever, one way or another, like, please.
It would either be awesome or terrible, and I'm not sure there'd be an in-between,
but it would be fantastic.
But it'd be really fun to watch.
It would be fantastic.
They need to go out and get a established college football, established name, established college football coach, a guy that comes with a reputation and knows how to turn a program around, because that job needs somebody that just has 4 years. Like, hey, you have 4 years, like you're fully bought out, whatever, through 4 years, go turn this program around. You have your time.
There's an easy answer to this question. They're not going to do it because they're stubborn, but the answer is Dave Aranda. I mean, that's my answer for every vacancy, but was at LSU as a defensive coordinator for a few
he's a guy who knows that conference.
Knows that. I mean, he's not really doesn't have like a strong footprint because LSU
he knows it.
Was his first SEC job, but he's been recruiting. He's recruited that part of the country. He's obviously recruiting Texas. Like, he can coach. Like, that's the guy, but I don't know that they're going to do that, and they're going to probably do something stupid because that's what Auburn always does. And my last note of the week, I did not mean to spend that much time on Auburn, but it was a good conversation.
Hey.
My last note of the week, because this is mind-bending, this is from Brett McMurphy, and I don't know if you saw this, so hopefully you can answer this trivia question. But Florida Atlantic beat UAB last week. UAB's quarterback was out with an injury, but nevertheless, FAU upsets UAB, which means now 128 of 131 FBS teams have now won at least one game as an underdog in the past 3 seasons. So there are 3 teams who have not won a game as an underdog the last 3 seasons. I'll give you 2 of them. Clemson is 0-1 as an underdog.
Okay.
Oklahoma is 0-2 as an underdog. Can you name the other team in college football that has not won a game as an underdog in the last 3 seasons?
Georgia? No.
Georgia lost as an underdog probably in 2020, the COVID year, I'm assuming.
You said not one as an underdog.
Every team has won as an underdog except for one team.
Yeah.
So Georgia was probably an underdog at some point in 2020.
Okay. It's not Alabama because they were underdogs against Georgia in the SEC championship game last year, right?
You're thinking in the wrongest direction.
Okay, wrongest. So I was thinking this might be a trick question where it's one of the top teams who's just never an underdog.
The answer is
Marshall.
South Florida.
Marshall just beat Notre Dame.
No. Yes. The answer is South Florida, who is 0-24 outright as an underdog the last 3 seasons. They've lost 24. They have not managed to pull off an upset as an underdog in
who's their head coach now?
Games. That brings up my point.
Oh, okay.
If you look at what Clemson does on offense, what Virginia looks like right now with Tony Elliott, former Clemson offensive coordinator, as their head coach, and what South Florida has looked like with Jeff Scott, former Clemson offensive coordinator, as their head coach, you can draw a lot of conclusions about all 3 of those programs. So there's that. So we move on to our list of games to look ahead to this weekend. I think I put 14 games on here. I got to bring up a quote for when we get to the next level. Sure. MACtion, baby. We talked about it. Happy MACtion Day to all who celebrate. We have 2 games tonight. Ball State at Kent State. This opened 3.5. Now Kent State's a 7-point favorite, and I only noticed this like half an hour ago, so I don't know. It
opened at 3.5 yesterday? When did it open?
It opened at 3.5. Yeah, I have no idea. So I don't know if there's an injury or if
it was 7 this morning.
But it's 7 now. You took the underdog and the over.
Underdogs and overs. That's my MACtion. That's my MACtion philosophy.
Right. Ball State, Kent State. Kent State's a 7-point favorite. Buffalo at Ohio tonight, open 2.5. Buffalo is a 3-point favorite now on the road. You have an over and underdog MACtion philosophy. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I did did blogs on BetSperts last year during MACtion. Every Tuesday and Wednesday had a pick or 2 for every game, and about a week in or so, 2, 3, 4 games in, I kind of started noticing the trend of underdogs and overs, with the exception of shout out Reed. I rode Central Michigan to a few wins, and it just kind of kept working. I think the weird timing works the weird day of the week, I think, benefits offenses a little bit more because defenses are a little bit more confused. And I think offenses in the MAC tend to take advantage of the weird a little bit more than defenses do. But yeah, it's a philosophy that I didn't really just came up by noticing the trend last year, and it's something that I'm going to keep riding this year until it starts to prove otherwise. But it's something that's worked, and I like Ohio at home tonight, getting those 3 points, because I think that's a team that has always played well at home in MACtion. And like you said with Buffalo, we were talking about this morning, Buffalo tends to give up the big play. And I think that's just, if you're giving up big plays on the road in a weird night environment like this, that spells good things for the underdog.
Yeah, Bradley Chubb just got traded to the Dolphins, which bums me out because it's going to be a really funny Photoshop, but we have to finish the show.
Okay.
Tomorrow,
he should not play next week. We should give him a week to get the playbook down. Don't worry about rushing him in, and just let him take his time.
I'm assuming the Dolphins are playing the Bears coming up?
Yeah, they don't. You don't need him to beat the Bears. Just keep Justin safe.
Tomorrow's MACtion: Central Michigan at Northern Illinois, opened 1.5. Now Northern Illinois, a 5.5 point favorite, and Western Michigan at Bowling Green, open 3.5, 4.5 point favorite is Bowling Green. I'm assuming in that situation you're going to take the road dogs there.
Very likely.
Games.
Yeah.
Thursday, a really, really interesting game in the Sun Belt. I don't know if you've looked at the Sun Belt East standings, but Coastal, I think, has one conference loss, and then everyone else except, I think, Old Dominion has 2. So the Sun Belt is wide open right now. App State opened a 2.5 point favorite on the road. Coastal is now a 3 point underdog at home on Thursday. A little interesting, but Coastal's been an up and down team.
Yeah, I'm still I still see the App State team that played so well early, and I looked at that line and kind of thought I really liked them on the road. I know Coastal's kind of disappointed so far this year with what they're bringing back, and I guess what they're bringing back was a quarterback whose name everybody knew, and outside of that, not as much. I think I kind of lean towards App State on the road in that one, but I very much looking forward to keeping an eye on that one. Plus, I love watching home games at Coastal because that field is just funny.
The teal turf. Friday night, hot take, Friday night Pac-12 after dark games have been more interesting than Saturday night Pac-12 after dark games. And another really fun one, Oregon State on the road at Washington. Washington opened a 3 point favorite. They are now out to a 3.5 point favorite. I don't really have any thoughts on this.
Washington is, I think Washington's going to be able to just score a little bit more than Oregon State. I like that offense. I probably lean there, but in all honesty, with Pac-12 after darks, it's usually just taken over and have some fun watching it.
Leg Show Magazine calling you out on your Ball State pick there. So saying that the home team is 5-1 against the spread in the last 6 in the Ball State. This
game, actually, that game does worry me a little bit with my overs and underdogs philosophy, because I think Kent State is a team that has that 3-5 record, but they've played some really good teams, and they gave Georgia, and now part of it was because Georgia sleepwalked, but they played Georgia pretty tough at Georgia. It's tougher than they probably should have. So that 3-5 record is largely I forgot who else they played, but they played 2 other pretty good Power 5.
They played Washington and they played Oklahoma. Good luck.
Exactly. So at least 2 very solid Power 5 offenses. They've tested themselves this year. So Ball State scares me a little bit there. I'm not going to lie. I think if I had one of the 4 picks for tonight that I'm most worried about, it's probably that one.
And then we move on to Saturday. We'll start in the noon window. And I just wanted to read you a quote. I don't have this game. I don't even know who Missouri's playing. But this was Coach Eli Drinkwitz about playing 11 a.m. kickoffs. He said, quote, "You probably don't want to crack your first beer before 10:30. I get that, but everybody has to make sacrifices," end quote. And I just want to say there are a lot of jokes about Missouri as a cultural fit in the SEC, and that right there is emblematic of that, because I don't think anybody, particularly in that part of the country, gives a damn what time they start drinking on Saturdays. If the game's at 11 or 12 local, they will start drinking at 10:30 in the morning. They will start drinking at 10 in the morning if the game's at 7 o'clock at night. They don't give a shit. So I don't think anyone
if that game's 11 a.m. local, they're drinking at 6:30.
Yeah. They might not even go to bed the night before. Nevertheless, I know we said we weren't going to talk about this team much. We already talked about them once. I just think this game's kind of fascinating and kind of an important game for both coaches. Florida at Texas A&M, open A&M -3. It's now -3.5. It's weird to me to be I'm kind of buying A&M a little bit after they lost another game. But here's another kind of weird circumstance for A&M right now. They are 3-5. Getting bowl eligible is going to be tough. Now they have the funniest. They have a non-conference game that I totally missed. They play UMass, and there's nothing funnier to me than massholes trying to watch the midnight yell and trying to decipher whatever that is. But if we give A&M that win, which they will win that game, they have Auburn, which is another game they should win. So, they're going to have to find another win to get bowl eligible. And I think this is like at home, coming off a game in which they had
End of the season is LSU now, right?
End of the season is LSU.
I like that. I don't know
at
why
least
it's kind of a
trending
forced rivalry,
upward.
but I like it.
Oh, because the games have almost always been insane. They had
that 7 overtime game.
That was the reason why that we now have the 2-point shootout in overtime is because of that stupid game, which was one of the funniest things I've ever watched. I don't have any thoughts. I just like A&M's kind of an interesting watch for me the rest of the year.
Both of those teams are an interesting watch.
Yeah,
because
it's bizarre.
A&M figured something out with Wegman. Like I think you have now, provided he's not concussed, because I saw the same thing you saw where he was getting evaluated by the trainer and Jimbo just kind of grabbed him by the shoulder pads and said, "Get back in there." I feel like I guess it's college football, so maybe we wouldn't have heard anything if he wasn't playing. A&M seemed to find something, and I know Florida's kind of disappointed this year, especially after that home win against Utah, but like they found ways, like Billy Napier's found ways to get them up for the big games. And I don't know if they see at College Station as a big game or as big of a game as it was probably they thought it would be early on in the year. But like that team has showed up when they've played their best opponents. And I'm interested to see what Florida team comes, because if we get the Florida team that played Utah, played Tennessee, played Georgia, like they're going to win that football game.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to the next one. Again, another game I don't really have a huge opinion on, but Texas Tech at TCU opened TCU minus 7.5. It is now out to 9.5. I talked about the butt bowl on Saturday, and boy, did the performance in the butt bowl stink from Texas Tech. That was actually the first time that I was kind of like, I'm not really sure Joey McGuire has any idea what he's doing right now.
Yeah.
Baron Morton was terrible, and they just kept throwing him out there. They got back in the game a little bit, but kind of an underwhelming performance. I mean, TCU should win this game, I would say, pretty easily at home, but it's a Big 12 game. Like, who knows? Just another interesting one. And as long as TCU keeps winning games, we have to keep talking about them, I think.
Yeah, TCU should probably win that game. I was very disappointed at the Texas Tech Baylor game. I kind of thought that one had all the potential in the world to be a 45-42 fun shootout, and it just kind of wasn't. But yeah, like that's it. The rest of the games, I mean, TCU probably should win the rest of their games, and we'll see if they can kind of keep getting by. But that West Virginia one was, I mean, I know that TCU ended up covering, but it seemed like West Virginia was a good side to be on there. And that was a very fun game to watch.
I'm going to call an audible, at least from my list, to move Tennessee
to
the end.
Give me a second. I'm going to turn a light on here because my face is getting darker.
Okay. Well, I will talk about real quick.
Right there. I'm back.
Man, they got us 2 weeks in a row. Texas has to play night games, and I hate it. Just get it over with. But nevertheless, they're on the road at Kansas State. For some reason, somebody decided to open Texas as a 1.5-point favorite on the road, and it's out to 2.5. And, like, it's on my card. I'm betting Kansas State. Like, I'll save it for why on Thursday, but, like, we're really going to put Texas a road favorite against anybody decent right now after what they did against Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I don't get that one. And I feel like Texas almost always, I mean, they're similar to a team like a Notre Dame where the public kind of bets them. I don't get that line at all whatsoever. But also there's the thought process of, does Vegas want me to take Kansas State? Is there something they know that I don't? I'm not really sure. If Texas was at home, I'd say sure. Like, I get that. I can see at least why you might think it. But yeah, I think I'm going with a Kansas State plus 2.5 and probably a Kansas State money line.
Yeah, I'm going to look in the camera right now and tell you that Vegas usually knows. I'm going to tell you right now, Vegas, I know more about Texas football than you do.
That's a statement from Dan right there. And he hasn't broken eye contact with the camera.
Yeah, and I'll clip that and put that on social media when Texas wins by 50 and call myself stupid, but that's a bad line. I told you I might have the Louisville game on my card this weekend, and you don't know who they're playing?
No.
They're playing James Madison.
Oh.
Louisville played 2 conference games in the first 3 weeks of the season. So they've only played 2 non-conference games. Of course, they end the season with Kentucky every year. So they've only played 2 non-cons. They have James Madison this week. It opened 9.5. Now Louisville's a 7.5-point favorite. And I'm going to have to do some digging on this game, but my first glance look at this is just like, why is Louisville going to care about this game?
Yeah, Louisville's either going to win by 30 or lose by 10, like double digits. I don't think
I don't know they're going to lose by 10, but like lose by
exaggerate. They're either losing or winning by like 30. I don't think there's really any more. But I guess that's kind of, you could say that about Louisville for most of their games so far this year. They're either going to play really, really well or play really, really bad, and there's not much of in between with them.
Yeah, I mean, I might end up playing James Madison and just a small sprinkle on some money line there just for like shits and giggles. And then I'll do the big 3 at the end. So one of the most intense rivalries in college football of like our generation, of our lifetime, but a game that kind of looks like it's going to stink. Florida State and Miami. Florida State opened an 8.5-point favorite on the road. It is now a 7.5-point spread. Miami has been bad most of the year, and then they have amped up the terribleness the last couple of weeks with the loss to Duke, the game against Virginia where they won.
You talk about sad football games.
Holy shit, was that a sad football game? But they did win. That was terrible. But this just smells like one of those because it's college football kind of lines to me, which is probably why it's come back to 7.5. Like Florida State should win this game. Florida State is a better team. But, man, if I'm getting a 7 and a hook, even if Miami's terrible.
The hook scares me, but, like, Miami's bad.
They
Tyler
are
Van
bad,
Dyke
but
is
it's a
bad.
rivalry game at home. Like, if Mario Cristobal is going to build,
they lost to Middle Tennessee State at home.
They did.
They don't have a home field advantage.
Kansas State lost to Tulane. They're still going to maybe you're advocating for them to make the playoff if they win out, which I completely.
Oh no, I did not. I did not say that. I said that loss is going to be a really real bummer for them if they do win out. I'm not saying they should be in the playoff.
I don't know. It just stinks to me, like. Because it's college football rivalry.
I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I would not touch
I'm not
Miami
going to bet
with a 10-foot pole, but I probably won't bet the game either.
Yeah, like
hopefully Phil's on Thursday to tell us about his Knowles and that
his Knowles. And then there's 3 big games this week. We'll start with one that you don't have, the one of the 2 undercards that you don't have personal stake in. Alabama opened a 13.5-point favorite on the road at LSU.
I got a little bit of a personal stake in this one too.
The other game's Notre Dame Clemson. I think you have a little bit of a stake more in that one is my only point there.
I got a little bit of a stake in this one
crying
too.
Out loud. I forgot Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly. You know what I mean.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, I know. Alabama, you know what I mean too.
Alabama's a 12.5-point favorite. I have no idea what to think here. Like, seems like a lot of points.
I think I lean a little bit towards Bama.
Interesting.
If it's going to come down to, it's so weird that I'm saying this about a Nick Saban team. If they can stay disciplined, I think Alabama should win that game by a couple scores. I don't know. I know LSU played really well against Ole Miss, but Ole Miss is a team that we've kind of all year been saying they're not quite as good as that record is. And the Tennessee loss still just really stinks to me. Just the way that they had that big game at home. I know it's an 11 a.m. start, but they came out completely laid an egg against a really good team, against a team, quite honestly, that Alabama very well could have beaten in Tennessee and probably should have beaten, again, if they stay disciplined. If Bryce Young is fully healthy, which obviously it seems like he is now, I like Alabama in that game. I don't trust Brian Kelly. I know it's at home, and he did fine home games with Notre Dame, but against top 5 opponents, he's like 1 and whatever in his last, like 1 and 9 in like the last 10 games, and he's been awful against Saban. And I know the potential for talent at LSU is a lot higher, but that team also lost a lot of guys, and they're not your typical LSU team. I think Bama's just a much better football team, but it's a lot more intriguing than I thought it was going to be. I'll give them that.
I disagree with, I don't think I'm going to bet it, but I disagree a little bit. Just like till Alabama shows me they can play with composure on the road, I don't want to back them as a double digit.
Fair.
That's kind of where, like, and you can say like the Tennessee game was alarming, but I think you look at the last 2 games, like that might have been a wake up call for LSU, because the last 2 games they've looked really good. Jaden Daniels has looked really good. He's been awesome, and then
he's a nice player.
Yeah, so like, man, I don't know. My instinct there says Alabama or LSU. I'm just not sure. The game that you actually have more of a personal stake in, Notre Dame hosting Clemson. Clemson opened a 5.5-point favorite. It is now 4.5. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know.
This game screams under to me, but like every time.
I mean, Notre Dame's going to try and run the football, and if they can't run the football, they're still going to try and run the football.
Yeah.
Defensively,
it just seems like a bad matchup for Notre Dame's offense.
It does. Yeah, it doesn't feel like. I think
maybe
they are.
I wonder.
Yeah, I don't think Clemson is that much better of a football team, but I think what they do well just matches up so terribly with Notre Dame, and that's not me trying to hype up Notre Dame. That's me more saying what I actually think about Clemson. Notre Dame's going to try and run the football, and I mean I forgot Clemson's defensive coordinator's name, but I saw a quote from his press conference. It's like, yeah, we know what they're going to do. They're going to try and run the football, and then when they don't run the football, they're going to look for number 87 and try and throw it to them, and that's Notre Dame's offense. And if Tommy Rees and Drew Pine can get together and figure some sort of something out that works for Drew Pine in a pass game, great. But I was texting about it with Phil this week, and Syracuse started to figure out, like, I'm going to get onto a little bit of a Notre Dame rant here, and I apologize for that. But I got very upset with Tommy Rees in the Syracuse game because on paper, yes, they won 41-24. That game probably should have been 51-24 or more. They started out running the ball and literally just getting an I formation and doing fullback dive with Audric Estime. It got like a couple plays in a row, establishing the run. Syracuse couldn't do anything to stop it. Then they get up 21-7, and Tommy Rees is like, oh, we should try, opening it up and throwing the ball and seeing what works. And it obviously didn't work because it never does with Drew Pine. If they can Tommy Rees needs to be okay with running the football, and that's what this team does really well, and creating some extensions off that and not trying to let his creativity get to him. You have to be a little bit creative to get Drew Pine working, but trying to open up the playbook to do everything you want to do with a quarterback that clearly can't is just not a formula for success. And that's what he tries to do. He's he's the offensive coordinator who, when something's working, he's like, that's great, it works, but it's not fun. I want to be fun. Like Arthur Smith, when you watch the Falcons, or for me when I'm watching the Bears, yeah, do I want them to be a little bit more fun? Sure, but the running the football thing is something they do really well and it works. You don't see them being nope, that's working. We need to change it up, though, because it's not working. It's not as fun. It's not what we're, quote unquote, supposed to be doing.
Just for a record, please refer to them as the first place Atlanta Falcons.
That was an electric football game. Absolutely electric.
Leg Show says Clemson's last tough test of the season. I actually disagree. Carolina? Yeah, I cannot wait. Now, the reality is that Clemson probably will just be able to run the ball all over UNC, and their defensive line is probably good enough to create enough havoc on Drake May.
Probably.
But man, I want to see that game so bad. I want to see if Drake May can really prove that he's a real Heisman candidate. Nevertheless, the last game of we save the best for last because that's what I felt like doing here. Tennessee and Georgia, 12.5 was what it opened. It's 8.5. I will save my full explanation, and I'll give you part of my explanation now, but I bet Georgia at 8. Here's the thing. Alabama was closed at 9 against Tennessee when they announced Bryce Young was in. So that means that at the time, Vegas thought Alabama was 11.5 points better than Tennessee on a neutral. At 8.5, it's saying Georgia's 6 points better than Tennessee on a neutral. I just guess my point is I don't think that the gap has closed as much as people think it did. Tennessee won that game against Alabama, but that was a game that was kind of the distribution of outcomes was fairly if that was within one. I don't think it was an outlier, but I don't think it necessarily proved anything. So the long story short, I think it should probably be about 10. And if it's 8, I'll probably take Georgia. I took Georgia. We'll save the full breakdown of what we expect to happen there. But 8.5, 8 feels a little short to me.
I probably like Tennessee until it gets to that 7. I forgot what game we were talking about earlier that we said the same thing about, but until it gets to about 7 is, I think, where I would probably not touch it. I don't think I'm going to bet against Tennessee at this point, which is a weird thing to say, but the offense is capable of beating anybody on any given day, not just covering, of beating anybody on any given day. And that big playability is so there. And we saw them do it on the road now against a team that I'm admittedly not very high on in LSU, but after struggling on the road at Pitt, they kind of silenced some doubters going to a tough place to play in LSU and putting up 1 million points there. I don't know how to feel about this one. Again, we'll get into it more on Thursday. I don't want to get too far deep into it, but I love the way with how confident Tennessee is playing, I should say. That team is so incredibly confident. You saw it in that Kentucky game. There was no doubt that they were going to win that game. In their minds, there was no doubt. There was no everyone else had some doubts. Everyone was like, this is a tough matchup for them, not for them. They didn't think so. They went out and absolutely stomped them. That team is playing with so much confidence, and Josh Heupel's got them clicking on such a high level that I didn't think they were capable of reaching. I have no idea what to expect, but man, if Tennessee's offense is going, I don't think Stetson Bennett can win a shootout.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that's what's going to we'll save the thoughts for it.
Yeah,
because I have a lot of thoughts on that game. Real quick before I forgot to set the stage for that game, and I may do this again on Thursday. First top 5 matchup in Athens since 1983. Georgia.
That's surprising.
First 1 versus 2 regular season game for either program. So this is going to be the
also
biggest game in Athens, Georgia history. 52nd meeting all time. So here's my question to you. Georgia has played two teams not currently in the SEC more times than they've played Tennessee. Can you name them?
Georgia Tech.
Obviously.
Got one. That's all I needed.
Yeah.
Hitting 50, hitting 500. Texas?
No. It is a team that is playing a team that's very near and dear to your heart. Georgia has played.
Oh, Notre Dame.
No, nice. Clemson is the other team they've played. The way that I have figured, and this is the last thing I'll say, the way I have figured and talked to one of my buddies from the SEC is, so if you don't know, before 1992 when Arkansas joined the SEC teams just scheduled whoever the fuck they wanted in conference. There was no rhyme or reason to what they did. They could just schedule whoever they wanted to play. And so Georgia and Tennessee didn't play. They've only, like I said, they've only played 51 times. And the way that we figure is that, so Georgia Tech was a founding member of the SEC. And then, Bobby Dodd didn't like the fact that they could just sign as many players as they wanted and wanted them to basically cap the number of players that you could recruit because he thought it was unfair to the kids. He's like, if we can sign 45 kids every year, someone's going to get pushed out eventually. He didn't like that. So he threatened to leave the conference and thought he had enough votes to keep, to limit the number of scholarships. Turns out he didn't. And Georgia Tech left, and their program has never been the same. But so John Heisman, of course, the Heisman Trophy guy, coached at Georgia Tech, and he and General Neyland had a really positive, respectful relationship. So up until the 80s, Tennessee played Georgia Tech almost every year. So I think it was just a matter of Tennessee would rather play Georgia Tech. Despite the fact that they've been in a conference with Georgia for 30 years, I think they've only played Georgia 8 more times than they've played Georgia Tech. So there's your history lesson. There's your history lesson of the day as we get ready for just the 52nd game between Georgia and Tennessee ever on Saturday, a game I cannot wait for, and I cannot wait to break that one down on Thursday. We'll break that down. We'll break down Alabama, LSU. We'll break down Clemson and Notre Dame. I don't know what else we'll throw on there. We'll find another game or two to throw on the list to break down. And then I'll probably do some more digging on that James Madison Louisville game. That one very much might be my off the radar, under the radar
Works for me.
Of the
I
week.
feel like Louisville's the perfect under the radar team for under the radar game team.
Fascinating to me. I don't know what, that's bizarre. Nevertheless, we will be back on Thursday. Hopefully Phil's schedule has worked out such that he will be able to join us. If not, it'll be me and Matt. Hopefully Phil will be there. But for the time being, for Matt, I'm Dan. Enjoy the MACtion tonight. Enjoy the MACtion tomorrow. And we will be back on Thursday.